Thank you for watching the Wine Centric Show. I am your host, Matt Weiss, and I am so happy to introduce our inaugural episode on the Wine Centric Show, where we tantalize your taste buds while talking to the titans of the wine industry. And there is no bigger one that I am proud to talk to this morning and introduce. He is the wine writer of the New York Times, the enlightening Eric Asimov. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. You were just traveling.
I was in California.
How was it? Were you doing wine trips or were you?
Yeah, this was for work. And so I did some reporting and I went to a big tasting of Chinese wines, which was fascinating.
Okay.
I was very happy to be out there. And
The burgeoning wine regions is a fascinating thing. China, India is making their own wines. I mean, I definitely want to hear where you're at on this. But before we even dive into that, I do have a slight that I feel. A bone. Yeah, a slight one. Just a little bit. A bone to pick with you, if you will. And you probably don't even know this, but back in the day, this would be like 2009, 2010, 2011, was I'm not tooting my own horn, but I was an up and coming somm wine director. I worked at Boulay and Gilt and ran the programs for BLT restaurants. And you used to have these tasting panels. I would read the pour every time and see all my colleagues and friends on the tasting panel. I never got invited.
It's my bad.
I mean, I just got to air the grievance, you know, but I'll get over it. You joined me today.
You and I will have to taste sometime.
That's right. Are you still doing the tasting panel?
We are not. That kind of ended with the pandemic.
Okay.
And it's just a new chapter now.
Okay. Do you think you'll ever bring it back?
I don't think so.
Okay.
There are a lot of internal reasons for that, but I'm not a huge believer in blind tastings. I would much rather just offer my own recommendations really at this stage. And I think we've been doing a good job of replacing the service that the panels used to provide.
Yeah. For those that don't know, you write the most frequently the article called The Pour, which is a amazing reference point for anybody in any level of wine drinker. I urge you to read it. It's in the New York Times, and it comes out every Tuesday.
Well, it's hard to say. It's posted when the editors get around to it. But, in the vestigial print newspaper, it comes out on Wednesdays.
On Wednesdays,
every
right?
Wednesday.
That's right. I used to read it on Tuesdays for the digital one because it would come out early. That's right.
Yeah. Now it's often posted the week before Thursday or Friday, but sometimes not till Monday or Tuesday. It's really hard to say.
It's a chaotic world we live in. You said something really interesting. You don't believe in blind tastings. So for those that are, and again, I'm just going to refer to some things for people who are just sort of starting out on their wine journey to really understand what we're talking about. And so if you've seen the Somm movies and all these things, there's a practice called blind tasting, which means that you get wines poured in front of you. You have no idea what they are, where they're from, and by your education and knowledge, you discern what the grape type is, what region it's from, maybe even down to the vineyard or the winery and the vintage. But you just said something that kind of blew my mind. You don't believe in blind tasting, maybe just in the context of these articles?
Well, don't get me wrong. Blind tastings have their use. They can be very educational. I think the kind of blind tasting that is, that we saw in the Somm movies and that is often written about is kind of ridiculous. I mean, it becomes a parlor trick, and people begin to think that in order to know anything about wine, you have to be able to tell what a wine is without having it identified, which really serves no consumer purpose. And as far as evaluation, I've never really understood why we have to deprive ourselves of the context and knowledge that would add something to understanding the wine in front of us. I have over the years decided that it's really pointless simply to evaluate glasses of wine. I am much more interested in evaluations of producers, for example. I think evaluating producers empowers consumers. They know who to look for rather than simply depending on critics to tell them which bottle to look for, as if everything is a zero-sum moment.
Need to put that on a T-shirt. What is it? Let's not evaluate the wine. What did you say? I have it in the notes, but
I mean,
say that again.
I think it's more useful to people to evaluate producers rather than individual bottles.
Okay.
Yes, every producer goes, it's not going to be consistent. We're speaking about good wines here. They're all going to show vintage variations. We can talk about that too. But it's more important to know the style of producers and figure out which styles are appealing than to simply start fresh all the time and look for specific bottles that have been approved by critics. I'm certainly not demeaning the motives of critics, but I think that all of these individual bottle ratings simply create a dependency on critics rather than teach consumers anything.
Okay, let me push you on this for a second, because I know that you notably have said that you are not a critic.
Well, I've never said that. I'm officially a wine critic because it has a very specific meaning in the context of New York Times jobs. I think this business, trying to draw distinctions between critics and writers, I don't really have much use for it. I consider myself a critic in the old style, in that I'm making judgments, opinionated judgments, and I'm expressing a point of view. I've never believed that a critic is somebody who rates bottles and a writer is somebody who writes feature stories. I think that's just a silly artificial distinction. Many people do both.
So when you write your article, especially if you're going to do your features that I love, is the 20 wines at $20.
Bottles under $20. Yeah.
Jeez. Yeah, I didn't take my
It's supposed to be a really catchy phrase. You're supposed to be able to remember that.
I didn't take my gummies, my ginseng gummies this morning. 20 under 20. So you have this. You yourself are an experienced wine drinker. You have tomes of knowledge, but as anybody, you're going to have preconceived notions. So when back to pushing you on the blind tasting thing for just a moment, I'm wondering if that might stop you from liking a wine if you have preconceived notions about a particular region, a particular grape, a particular producer, a particular vineyard, whatever. How do you get over those preconceived notions to then say, okay, I'm going to write about I'm going to put this in my 20 wines under 20?
I would say two things. First of all, you have to be professional enough to understand that you might have predilections, biases. Then the tasting process involves testing those biases. And I think that's something I recommend to everybody. When I was writing in a regular column called Wine School, one of our tenets was that you have to go back and taste things, not really taste, drink things that you think you don't like, and check in, because so often we make these decisions on the basis of a bottle that we had, good or bad. And those positions become fixed. And you have to check those predilections at the door, to borrow from a well-known phrase. I try to do that. While I was in California, actually I was in Santa Fe at the Santa Fe Wine and Chili Festival recently for the first time. Great
I like the
event.
sound of that.
And I tasted a California Pinot Noir from a producer that I know. I didn't like their style. It was one of they used to make those big flamboyant, oaky, high
16% alcohol
alcohol.
Pinot Noir.
Right, exactly. And now they're completely changed. They have new ownership, and it's now instead of a small label owned by two entrepreneuring winemakers, it's owned by some big group. I don't even know who, but they're making wines that I think are much better.
Gotcha.
So I think that people have to be professional enough to get over whatever they think their biases are. Just as book critics, film critics, theater critics, car critics, and everybody else, who is making judgments and knowing a little bit about what they're judging seems to get over it.
Yeah, I would say that's true. It's just in my day job of representing wineries, and I'm sure you hear this all the time, but that you overuse phrase of, I blanketly don't like Chardonnay, and my
Yes.
my colleague of Vintage 59 Imports, Deborah Lewis, says famously, if you don't like Chardonnay, you just haven't found the right one yet.
So I wrote a column about that. It's the same thing with consumers. They tasted a Chardonnay 20 years ago, or they read something and it's stuck in their mind. And, now they have very stereotypical images of Chardonnay, but they're not the ones who are doing these tastings. I think professionals need to get over that. On the other hand, as I said, there are times when blind tasting can be educational, but it's not the be all and end all that, the wine culture of the 80s, 90s, and aughts made everybody think it was. I mean, it's a fiction. The whole, wine advocate, wine spectator notion of the objective critic is a complete fiction. But these are people like everybody else with their predilections, and you can taste a wine blind and end up with the conclusion that Montebello is a bad place for Cabernet, as a Wine Spectator critic once said.
Who wrote that?
Do we need to name names here?
No.
He's now retired, but
No, you can tell me offline.
James Lobby.
Okay.
And if he's entitled to his opinion, but that's what it is. It's an opinion, like all of the opinions that wine writers are offering. It's nonsense that they're the process of some objective or the result of some objective
of one person. Yeah, or a few voices. And just to clarify what Eric was referring to there, and maybe you're not familiar, but Montebello is the site of Ridge Winery's top wine. It's in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and it is one of the hallowed grounds of America for growing unbelievably delicious Cabernet Sauvignon. I highly recommend you get yourself on a bottle, although it's difficult. I'll pause really quickly there just to let everybody know all of the wines that we're going to talk about on this show, like Ridge Montebello, if they can get their hands on it, but some of the other beautiful California Chardonnays, or even the wines that Eric recommends, they're going to be available by using this link. If you go to wine.com/wine-centric-picks, that's wine.com/wine-centric-picks. As most of you who know me know that I always recommend having a great rapport with a local retailer. Sometimes in this day and age, it's hard to get there. It's hard to get the wines. Wine.com makes it really easy for you. So just use that link and find these wines and you will drink deliciously. Okay, let's switch gears for a moment to something that you have been very adamant about and very positive about, and that's the drinking of natural wine. You wrote an article about it. And I want to tie that in because you did, and I think it was brilliantly done, to the decline in global wine consumption. We get it that wine is intimidating for people, for the people that are just getting into wine. You get it that, you know, there could be a certain sort of snobbery about wine that we knew in the 90s and the 2000s. A part of me just thinks it's like, well, maybe you're just switching, we joked earlier, to that THC gummy and leaving the wine because the gummy makes you feel a whole different things. What say you?
I think that THC gummies and wine can coexist. I think that people who are simply switching highs were drinking wine for the wrong reasons.
Mm.
And I would say that, you know, there's a vast spectrum of wine drinkers, and a significant percentage of those wine drinkers are simply drinking wine to catch a buzz. They found something they liked. Maybe it was a California Chardonnay or whatever, you know, and they buy that. They shop by brand and buy that brand and drink it as a, you know, self therapy or whatever. You know, those are the people who might switch to a different buzz, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are also, you know, my audience and my concerns lie with people who really love wine and you know, catching a buzz is a nice
Bonus.
it comes with wine, of course, but there are so many other aspects of wine that are interesting and that are not going to be replaced by switching intoxicants.
Yeah. Yeah. What I love about, and I completely agree and try to let others understand this, is that wine encompasses everything. It encompasses politics, geography, science, economics, history. I mean, you can discuss such a wide array of topics over a bottle of wine that for the intellectual or for the person who likes to do introspective or retrospective thinking, it's the ultimate thought provoker.
Yeah, I think wine has many levels to it. You can enjoy it simply because it's a great drink. You can get into it more if you want to, and you know, there's a lot of layers in the onion, and you can go as far as you want, but or you can just stop at a great drink. The problems with American wine culture is that we ended up convincing people that they needed to be experts to be able to enjoy wine. And that's why so often you know, when I talk to people about wine, and I'm sure with you too, people are so quick to say they like wine, but they don't know anything about it,
Mm-hmm.
you know, as if
That's the
that's
whole
a
point of
problem.
this Wine Centric Show, is to make you feel comfortable not knowing anything about it or knowing as much as you can know about it. You want to know about it.
Yeah, I mean, people, there's no obligation to learn anything about wine, I don't think, just as nobody is obliged to learn about baseball or opera or dance or whatever. But if you develop an interest, then you plunge in.
Speaking of baseball, are you a baseball fan?
I am.
Are you a Yankees fan?
I am.
All right. Well, congratulations. What do you have a prediction on the World Series? As when this airs, we will be, I think, on game 2.
You know, I really, really try to steer clear of predictions because that just, you know, I root for the Yankees. I take it too seriously. You know, I live and die with my teams, and just I'm going to hope for the best. I mean, I think it's the, you know, we really did get a World Series of the two best teams, and we've got the biggest stars in the game, and it's what everybody wanted. Although as a New Yorker, I couldn't help hoping for a Subway Series, but
Yes.
you know, I'm just gonna hope for the best.
Okay. What will you be drinking during game 1?
I don't even know when is game one. I don't know.
I think it's
You know,
Saturday. Saturday the
Yeah, I guess it depends what I'm
Or,
cooking.
what,
It depends what I'm having for dinner. If it's Friday, I won't even be watching it because I've got an event that I'm going to.
okay, tell me this then, because I know that's my answer also when everybody asks me, oh, what do you recommend or what do you drink? And then it's time and it's place. Well, okay, so we're in the fall. It's got a little nip in the air. There's baseball. And if it's beer, by the way, you could say beer. Well, that's okay. But like, yeah, what are, or how about just some of your most memorable drinks while watching baseball?
I mean, I remember the games probably better than the wines. The point is, if you're doing something else, you're drinking something that you're really enjoying, but doesn't require the concentration that you might want to give to a great wine. So if I'm at home and I'm cooking something, and it really depends on what we're eating.
Yeah.
I mean, I here's another heresy for you. I don't really believe anymore in precise wine and food pairings or
Oh my
any kind
goodness.
of.
You are just ripping up all my basis and tenets of understanding wine, but let's go.
I mean,
This is
look,
why we do this.
for sommeliers, it's a great thing. Well, here's the deeper issue. I think we've modeled our advice to consumers too much on the sommelier life, blind tasting, precise food pairings. These are things that are much more intrinsic to working as a sommelier than they are to consumers simply wanting to enjoy wine.
Hmm.
I think for consumers, the idea that every dish has its perfect match in a wine, it just creates too much anxiety. There are tons of wines that will go with every dish, and it's much rarer that you come up with something that just doesn't work at all. So, my feeling is if you find a wine and food that really synchronize well, that's a great thing. But what's the worst that could happen? You have a good wine, you have good food, and hopefully you have good company, and you're going to have a great time even if they're not a perfect match. So chill out.
Right. Yeah, I think well, it's also, by the way, a metaphor for those people who might be single and listening to this and people telling them or them believing that there's only one partner for them in this life. Perhaps there's many options.
Right.
So here you get life lessons on the Wine Centric Show. Okay, there's a lot of you're like a rebel now, from
I
what I
don't
know. I
intend
mean,
to be a rebel. I'm just, I have at this time. I mean, look, my hair is white, which means I've gotten a lot of life experience, and this is what I've learned. We just all need to not be so uptight about wine. It's a great drink and a lot of fun. And going back to your question earlier, I think that's the appeal of natural wine.
okay,
We tend to think of natural wine as only farming organically at the very least and not manipulating the wine in the cellar. But I think the ethos goes far beyond that. For one thing, I believe natural wine is responsible for the amazing diversity that wine drinkers have today. But it's also part of it is just taking the pretension out of wine and just making it something fun to drink with your friends and not worrying about all of the right glass and the right pairing and the right words and all of that.
so I agree with what you're saying and taking out the pretension. The problem is looking at it from the average consumer's perspective is they don't often have the budget to maybe go out and try all these wines, and it sucks if I go out and spend $20 on the wine and then I don't like it. You know what I mean? So I like the idea of having at least somebody who can not tell me, but perhaps guide me and giving me options. So it doesn't have to be a sommelier. But by the way, for all of you out there, the sommelier, the French definition of the word simply means the one who takes care of the wine. That's all it means. And so I do still want somebody that I can go to my local retailer rather than me just going to the grocery store. I know in New York you can't buy wine in a grocery store, but for the rest of the country, and just looking at a section rife with all these wines, and me trying to have to figure out what am I going to like and then spend money on.
You're absolutely right. That's an enormous issue. And let me say first of all that I am by no means criticizing sommeliers. I take advice, I seek advice from sommeliers all the time whenever I'm in a restaurant. And I am very much with you in that the most important thing that people can do to improve their wine drinking is to take advantage of expertise. That is, find a good wine shop. I mean, wine.com, as you say, is a good backup, but there's no replacement for a really dedicated wine shop with merchants who love wine and who want to turn their clientele onto good bottles. And the same with sommeliers when you're in a restaurant. Nobody knows the wine list in a restaurant better than a sommelier. And so I highly recommend seeking advice but keeping in mind what your budget is, asking for advice within that parameter. I think that, we have a lot of forces arguing against expertise today. Politically, culturally, in the wine culture, all of the apps that people depend on. I think there's a whole generation that would rather go into a shop and look up a bottle on Vivino than to ask a merchant and have a human interaction about the wine. So yeah, that's one thing. And I think it's a really interesting conflict between the glories of what I see the glories of diversity, which means having many different choices, and the comfort in simplicity. And that's the difference between, say, the wine business and the spirits business. The spirits business is far more centralized. Yes, you have a lot of interesting craft distillers, but you've got a few big corporate giants who have the budgets and the knowledge to make very good products and to market them accordingly. In wine, you have many great small producers, far more than you do in beer or spirits, all of whom are making, or many of whom are making traditional wines with indigenous grapes from their areas. And it's great to have those options, but it's also overwhelming. So what do we do about that?
Right.
That's where I hope um, my role comes in, where I can recommend producers or styles of wine and inspire people to want to seek them out. And maybe, if you go into a good shop and I make a recommendation, you might not find that particular bottle, but you might find something analogous. Yeah. Part of having access to a wonderful diversity is not having a sure thing. It's a little bit like, driving on the interstate. When you drive around this country on an interstate and you pull off at a rest area, your options are few and well known. They're all like fast food franchises or Starbucks or whatever. You know what you're going to get, which for some people is a good thing.
Yeah.
There was a book that came out around 40 years ago called Blue Highways, which touted the virtues of not taking the interstate but driving the the back roads, which gave you a real opportunity to see the country from a food perspective. You can also visit local cuisine and non-corporate restaurants and mom and pop places. And yes, you've traded in the sure thing of McDonald's or whatever fast food franchise, and you're taking a chance that you might get something wonderful. And yes, that $20 might be wasted. I don't know. I mean, that's a lot of money nowadays. I understand that. But it depends on your priorities in life and how you want to experience the world.
Yeah, I think there's so much to unpack there, and it touches on so many levels. Back to the argument of having the wine professional, the sommelier in restaurants, and how that's become an expendable option and
Yes.
really become a dinosaur. And, some of my sommelier friends are going to hate me for saying this, but I'm not sure that that's wrong. The other end of that I don't like is, well, then you just have somebody who doesn't care about the wine that's writing the wine list. And maybe they really care about the food, but they're not providing the options. Like we have this great, in the town where I live here in North Carolina, we have this great Thai restaurant. Some people who I really respect their opinion have said this is the best, most authentic Thai food I've had in this country. And it's packed every night for lunch and dinner. But you go there and the wines, it's just like, seriously? Why doesn't anybody care? So again, I'm not saying that they have to have a sommelier there, but I would love it if somebody there, a consultant, the manager, ask me, could just pay attention to wine and be like, okay, what do I need? What would provide my guests with nice options? And again, like you said, it doesn't have to be the home run pairing, but just provide me with some options that either excite me as a knowledgeable wine professional, or they excite the newcomer to wine that's just realizing that they like oaky and buttery Chardonnay, but have the best example or a really good example of that, And I don't know, I kind of feel in a way, it's like my therapist says, he's like, I need to let go of all expectations and let go of the mark and just be. It's very Buddhist. It's like, that's the vibe I'm getting from you. However, I can't let go.
I understand the frustration that people feel, but I also think there's a frustration that comes with not having choices.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. And I want to have choices. I just want to have well curated choices.
Yes. I completely get that.
I don't want to let go of that feeling. And I know you've had it, of that amazing pairing of like, to use a cliche, but like when you've had foie gras with beautiful Sauterne, and it's just like, I mean, it's as if they were meant to each other, which maybe they were meant to, so I don't want to lose that possibility of achieving that, I guess is what I'm saying. And I'm fine with,
that's a great thing about restaurants, and, restaurants that take wine seriously enough to have a sommelier who can, make those recommendations, who's had the opportunity to taste most of the things on a list and to taste the dishes that are being offered by, a visionary chef who's not just giving you a roast chicken or whatever. I think those are great opportunities, and that's part of the experience of going to a fine restaurant.
yeah.
I just don't think it applies to, consumers at home who are just beginning to get comfortable with wine maybe, or just don't want to put in that level of effort. I don't think they should be made to feel inadequate.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want you to be able to go to your local pizza spot and drink a great bottle there, with pizza and feel good about it.
And I think there's this might be one instance where the trickle down theory might actually work. You're beginning to see.
Is that a political statement, by the way, you're making right now?
I'm ripping it off from the inadequate economic theory that politicians have been spouting for so long.
Yeah.
But in restaurants, you're beginning to see restaurants from ethnicities where it's not traditional to serve wine with the cuisine, for example, beginning to do it, and experimenting it. And, I think a place like Slanted Door in California, or now with franchises around the world, was one of the earliest, or Tandin in Paris, a restaurant that was famous for its list of pomerols and other great wines.
Pomerol, by the way, for everybody, is one of the highly sought after Merlot-based wines in the right bank of Bordeaux, and they're usually pretty pricey. Things like Chateau Petrus have put that place on the map. Sorry to interrupt.
No, and beginning, you start to see a few more of these places, but it doesn't happen immediately. It will probably take several generations, over time. In New York, pizza places, beginning with Roberta's about, I forget when they opened, maybe almost 15 years ago. There's many of them in New York now that have great lists of natural wines, and it's a great thing. It's a wonderful thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm totally here for everything that you're saying with respect to take the pretension away from it, be adventurous, and all those things. So that's, I think, a lesson learned for all of us. And it's funny hearing that from you, especially as like just coming up through the ranks of being a sommelier. You were writing these articles, and it's not like you're not saying what you've always said, but it's just it's a reframe. So, but we always need a reframe. And speaking of which, reframing things, I'm wondering from the wine growing side of things, there's no question that we have climate change. Whatever political side of the fence you sit on, climate change is, by the way, it's nothing new. The world and the earth is always changing. It just seems to be happening more rapidly now. What do you see? You were just in California, as far as what's changing in farming practices. And do you think we will eventually see, because of climate change, non-traditional varietals grown in places where they didn't traditionally grow?
I think the answer to your second question is definitely. I think farmers are struggling to figure out what to do. And, if it were simply a question of the weather getting warmer over time, I think farmers could figure out how to deal with that in relatively natural ways. But there's so much more that is existentially threatening. For example, you have this has become increasingly common. You have very warm late winters, and the vines begin to bud, and then you have a frost which kills the bud and effectively kills a significant percentage of the harvest before the growing season even begins. You have hailstorms that might have happened once in a century happening several times a decade in the middle of the growing season, which again things. Because of the increased warmth, you might have, instead of one cycle of a particular pest in a growing season, you might have three cycles. I mean, the catastrophic threats to growing grapes have increased dramatically, and I think that's the major issue that's come with climate change. And I think that is now experimentation around the world, growing interest in hybrid grapes, which were for so long kind of dismissed as incapable of making great wine. I think we've seen proof now that that's not true.
Give me an example of some hybrid wines that you're enjoying.
Well, I think Deirdre Heakin in La Garagista in Vermont, who started making wine maybe at this point 15 years ago, using hybrids that were bred specifically for cooler weather.
Excuse me.
has demonstrated that if you meticulously as she does and are conscientious in the winemaking and creative, you're making your hybrids are capable of making amazing wines. And in that sense, I think that this is something new, and Deirdre is maybe the most creative winemaking in American wine history.
Okay. Let me unpack that for a second. So for those of you who are wondering, what does hybrid mean? Very generally, there's two sets of grapes. One is a table grape, essentially Vitis Lambrusca, and then one is a winemaking grape called Vitis.
You have the European species vinifera that has been historically used to make all of the what we consider the great wines of the world, and these
Right.
are all the famous wine grapes, and even the very not famous wine grapes. But then you have other species, Lambrusca and a bunch of others that you can genetically mix these grapes.
Right. So they're genetically mixing these grapes and planting them and farming them, or maybe blending them in a wine. And the idea there is that the non-Vitis vinifera, we'll say, for sense of simplicity, is more weather resistant and
disease resistant.
So farmers, and it all comes back to the farm. For those of you who watch this show, you'll know that one of my tenets of wine is great wine is made in the vineyards, not in the winery, meaning that you have to be a good farmer. Most winemakers would rather, or at least winemakers that you and I like to drink, would prefer to do as less as possible in the winery and make sure that the grapes have the best chance on the vine. So, so these hybrids, they're weather resistant. They're, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term, easier to grow, and then making good wine. Is there any particular hybrid varieties that you recommend, or that regions that we should be paying attention to?
I have to say that I'm not an expert on hybrid varieties, and I would say if you can find if you can taste wines from Garagista or other Vermont producers, they can be very interesting. There's no big, widely distributed producer that I can think of who's making hybrid wines right now.
Okay.
There's a great example from the Azores. I bet. Did anybody know they made wine in the Azores? Well, there's a Azores wine company that makes a wine using Isabella. Isabella is an old hybrid grape that was once made illegal to use in some European areas, and it's really a terrific wine.
Just illegal to use because it was a hybrid, and it
was a hybrid, right? Yeah. It wasn't a vanilla.
And the Azores, by the way, is a place that everybody would love to visit. Where is it? It's way in the sea. Is it between Madeira and? I don't remember exactly where it is. Okay, so hybrids, and I just want to put a button one more time on the natural wine thing, because my last question, to bring it back to that: do you think that we would be further down the road with natural wines if we had more of an official definition?
No, I think that having an official definition would make it easier to co-opt natural wines. And then, you would weaken the definition over time to allow bigger corporations with lobbyists and influence to claim they were making natural wines. I think part of the ethos of natural wine is the small producer. And, I think there is an if you know element to natural wine that, again, comes up to this fundamental conflict that we have nowadays of diversity versus how do consumers know what to look for? And I think natural wine is something that one probably really needs to educate oneself about, either getting to know the producers, or as an easier path, getting to know the importers, or simply the venues that serve them or sell them. But I think that creating a rigid definition would do more harm than good, and not serve consumers in the long run.
So, what for you, in your mind, defines a natural wine?
I'm not either militant about it, or very particular about it. I think, first of all, you do have to farm in an ecologically minded way. I think to give that an exact definition of what that means is difficult. Um, there are, yes, a lot of weasel words in this area, like sustainable, where you're you can be called sustainable even if you're using chemical herbicides, which I don't think is correct. But I do think you have to be a very environmentally minded farmer. I think you have to not add anything in the cellar except maybe a small amount of sulfur dioxide. There's a spectrum here where some people are absolutely militant and refuse the use of any sulfur dioxide, which is a stabilizer and antioxidant that has been used for a long, long time.
Yeah, it's a preservative.
I don't really have any problem with small amounts there.
Yeah. And by the way, they're naturally occurring in wine also,
Yes,
sulfites.
yes.
But I guess the one other thing is a cultivated yeast versus natural yeast, meaning any fermented beverage, whether it be beer or spirits, yeast eats the sugars and thus you have alcohol. Natural wines, from my understanding, is it has to be a naturally occurring yeast, so no cultivation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's different. I think that's the case. There's it's very hard to be specific about a lot of things. I mean, take for example, any wine region that's largely a monoculture. Take Burgundy, for example. When you travel to Burgundy, you don't see a diversity of agricultural crops. You just see vineyards, only vineyards. So, and you see a lot, and in the organization of Burgundy, you have very small vineyard plots in a particular area that are owned by a lot of different farmers. So one farmer can farm organically or biodynamically, can be side to side by somebody who uses chemical herbicides or fertilizers. And, these things drift in the air. You can't really be super precise about these things. A lot of young winemakers who want to make natural wine might have to share space in a California winemakers, what Americans call a custom crush facility, a facility that rents out space to small producers to use to make their wines, because they're not big enough or financially viable enough to have their own space. And if you use naturally occurring yeast, the guy next to you might be pouring in yeast from a bag, and all of these yeasts kind of mingle and come together, and you don't really know which yeast is fermenting your wine. So, you can come up with all of these definitions, but often you're not really positive about what's going on. So I like to say that natural wine is an ideal, and people do their best to approach that ideal. And, the closer you can get to it, maybe the better. But, we're not, at least I'm not there taking names and doing tests and making sure that you're actually achieving it.
Sure. Yeah. I'll look for my ideal, but let go of my expectations. Eric, this has been enlightening. I really appreciate your time. I want to leave with two things. One, you're not militant, but I do hear that you are quite the practiced martial artist.
Well, I have been doing martial arts for 25 years, Japanese martial arts. Yes, it's an important part of my life.
Is there a specific discipline or?
Traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu, tomiki, aikido, and karate.
All right. Well, you heard it here. Don't mess with Eric, even though he's not militant. And then lastly, I know there's probably a poor article coming up in the New York Times very soon about what you're going to be drinking for Thanksgiving, but can you give us a preview or share about some things you might recommend for Thanksgiving?
Yeah. I mean, I have been writing about what to drink with a Thanksgiving meal for 20 plus years. And, a certain number of lessons have started to sink in, I think. First of all, again, don't worry about pairings unless you are having a very small sit-down dinner for Thanksgiving. My Thanksgivings historically were always big affairs with, 25 to 30 people and people bringing all kinds of dishes in addition to the turkey and stuffing. And, you drive yourself crazy if you're looking for wines that are going to be precise matches. So what you're looking for are very flexible wines that can go with a lot of different foods. That means you don't want like very tannic wines. It's a general rule. You want dry wines. So as much as I love predicate German Rieslings, which might have some residual sugar in them, they might be turnoffs for some people. So I steer clear of them. If you're having a big party, don't bring transgressive wines like orange wines or, even like natural wines that are on the edge, because you're there to have fun. You're not there to turn people on to your latest discovery. So I always recommend, having reds and whites because you're catering to people's tastes, and having plenty of them because nothing's worse than running out of wine at Thanksgiving, except maybe running out of food.
All right. Perfect. Well, I wish you a very happy Thanksgiving.
You too.
Thank you for being on here and helping people out on their wine journey. And we'll say for all of you out there, go and make sure you follow Eric on Instagram. What is your Instagram handle?
It's at Eric Asimov.
At Eric Asimov. You can see his name on the screen. And do yourself a favor, read The Pour, and you will learn how to drink deliciously. Thank you.